So in this video, we are going to show how to add a new API. So I want to make sure that I'm in the correct account. You can check which account you are in by going to My Actions, Manage My Organization. So the first step we need to do is we need to add a vendor. As you can see that there are three pieces of information we need to record. Who is the vendor? What's the API? What are the different endpoints under those APIs? So let's add a new vendor called CoinCap. So under this section, manage my APIs, under my actions, manage my APIs. Here you can go to vendor and there are a few options to add either directly a vendor or an API to an existing vendor or an endpoint to an existing API. So since this is a new vendor, we'll just say add a new vendor. It's always useful to provide some metadata, for example, a nice looking image for the vendor and other descriptions here. So let's do that. So this is basically the logo of the vendor. So that's their logo. So we stored it. And we call this vendor Coin API. We just try to retain the same original name, CoinCap. And the home page of this vendor is this guy over here. And we can add some simple description about this vendor. So whenever some developers are using this API, they get the right information. So we can simply provide this. We can say this is a company tools for real-time pricing and market activity for over 1,000 different cryptocurrencies. So that's good enough. And under the section called API keys, we can store the API key related to this. I have already registered with this vendor and gotten their API key. And here I have already their API key is called API underscore key, so we can store it as it is. And their actual key is this one. Okay, so make sure this is copied well. So basically, this is every vendor has its own process of registering and getting the key. Sometimes they send it through email, sometimes they have in their portal that you need to sign in, but essentially this is what it is. Some of the other information that you can store here, for example, if you're creating an account to receive the API key, you may want to store it here. Whoever created this account, this is helpful in a team environment. If somebody wants to go change the API key or get a new key, if key is stolen or any other issues, this is the credential informations logging into this particular vendor. The other useful information you can attach with this vendor is their legal information. For example, oftentimes these vendors have the terms of services, which we should look into to make sure that we are compliant. And this information is useful for any person who's using this API. So we will just record this here in the system here. This is called terms of service. Okay, and it looks like they have one more document, which is called privacy statement, privacy policy. So we're going to store that as well. So add one more privacy policy. Okay, and basically we are done with the vendor section. So this information is helpful to be recorded so that others can consume the API, especially for the admins when they're testing and all. This helps. So once we're done with the step, we press the continue button. So this continue button allows us to add the API information. So this vendor may have multiple APIs. Sometimes they have crypto APIs, sometimes they have exchange APIs, some they have marketing APIs. So they have different kinds of APIs. And doesn't look like they have a version, or maybe we can call this version 2 by looking at their endpoint information, version 2. And the vendor is, we just created the vendor. Once you add the vendor, it starts to show up here. So CoinCap. And the category is crypto. For this case, I think we are adding all the APIs under Go plugin recommended special category that we created. So we'll just attach this category. And home pages, again, we can provide the same link. Sometimes they have a specific documentation page. We can actually see if they have that and then quickly add that. Our API. So we can add actually this documentation page. Okay, and the description is this API provides so once it is done, we can look at the other section. So essentially, the authentication can be configured at multiple levels. And the reason for that is each API could be unique, or all the APIs for a vendor could be authenticated one single way. So there is a flexibility if each of those APIs have their own specific authentication mechanisms, we can configure for each API separately or at the vendor level. So as you saw, I stored the API key at the vendor level, which we'll use for all their APIs. We can add any restrictions if we are aware of these APIs. We can add any licenses that is specific to only this API. They could have other agreements as well. So we can store that. But in this case, we can simply skip this piece of information. So we continue again. And at this point, we add the endpoint information. And so first we choose the API that we just added. I think it was Markets API, this one. And the endpoint is what just Satish provided. I'm going to remove the question mark because that's an indicator for query parameters, which we'll handle in the parameter section separately. So here, once again, we can provide the documentation page. Sometimes each endpoint may have its own documentation, but just to save some time, I'm just going to add whatever the information is provided here, or the link that is provided here. Okay. This is important because when users are trying these APIs, it helps them to understand these APIs in a better way. So you want to write descriptions that are useful, and the users can consume these APIs in a useful way. So once we are done here, we can simply come to authentication. And here, if you remember, we had option to store multiple keys at the vendor level. So what I'm saying is pass the key in the message header and the key stored in API key location 1. So once that is done, now let's get some parameters here. And the parameters here look like, one is the base symbol. Also provide an example value. base crypto, and we can add a new parameter called code symbol, which is basically a target crypto. Okay, so I've added base crypto, target crypto, and is it required? I'm going to say yes. And the example could be USD. And there is another parameter, which is limit. So I'm going to add that. Limit. I'm not 100% sure if this is optional or required. For the time being, I'll say it's not required. And probably this limits how many results it returns. Okay, an example value could be 2. I'm not sure about this, but we'll try this out. I'm not making this required parameter. So once this is done, I can save this. And one thing which we haven't done so far is we didn't add the bearer keyword in front of the API key here. So if you look at Satish's recommendation, he's saying that we need to pass like this. So this will be the registered API key, and authorization needs to be like that. So we'll say authorization bearer. Okay, so this basically this will be passed in our header. Okay, so I'm just looking at this description here. So once this is done, I can save this and go to my endpoint under the endpoint section. This is the API we added, and I can edit this to make sure. Now, if you remember, I switched to the second place where I stored the API key in the way that was recommended here by Satish. So here, basically, I'm saying if you look back here, if you look back at the vendor level, this is the way we stored it at place number 2 here. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4. So the system allows to store up to 4 for the time being, but that's basically the point that we are storing our information at second place. So we can specify that here. So instead of saying this, we are saying 2. Right? Okay, now let's try to run this. Hopefully this works. Okay, I made it. So I want to move this here. Not the default value, it's here. 8. Okay, so now we can say that we can see this. We have the descriptions that we stored. And if we go to the admin, so we have the API, sorry, the vendor, CoinCap. And if we click CoinCap, it tells us the description that we added, all the details who added. We also have the documents we attached, so the readers or the consumers can consume them, and the documentation page is added as well. So all that information recorded is here. Now let's try to run this API. Okay, so I got some error. Not sure this is 400 error. Let's see what it is. Invalid query. Invalid query. Okay, let's see what the problem is. So this is message header. Parameters query, parameters query. So I can go back and see what the error was. Invalid query. Okay, since this was done earlier, let me see. One of our other members, Krishan, has added some of these APIs earlier. So let's see why it's giving an error to us. So API client, API your markets. Okay, this doesn't actually have a query parameter. Oh, this one has. Markets. Okay, it's working. Let's see. So this did work. But it is not, I did not supply any parameters. So maybe that could be the case that the query parameter is actually not needed. So I'm going to make these guys optional. Although Satish mentioned here that these are query parameters, but not sure if I change this to optional, don't supply any query parameters, whether this now you can see that there is no required parameter. I made all these optional. Okay, so this might be the problem actually. This could also be the problem, this guy. So here, to limit actually, the default value is not description is this. Example value is 2, date. Okay, run. Okay, good, it works now. So here, I did two things. I made those cryptocurrency inputs as optional parameters, and perhaps it's giving me all the results with perhaps I can specify limits as well. But now let me make these parameters required now so that we can provide the base and target currencies. And now if I go run this, now it will expect me to provide I didn't edit it properly. So I need these two. So target crypto and the base crypto. So I made these two required parameters. Now I have two required parameters. So let's say this is OGN. and this is USD. So it did work. So you can see that I get the response back. And now this is giving me a result for only the specific base symbol and code symbol. So it's all good. So that pretty much sums up all the steps that we need for adding the original API. If you have any questions, we'll discuss them live. Thank you. Bye-bye.